So today we're here to talk about app compat in Windows 10. And I thought about doing it a la Sinofsky and kind of channeling the Windows 8 story. Nothing breaks on Windows 10. Any questions? All right, have a nice day. Yeah, speaking of what's your email address, if your Twitter handle is @appcompatguy, which mine is, it turns out that when Mr. Sinofsky says stuff like that, your Twitter handle literally explodes. Did you hear that? Because nothing's going to break. You're out of a job. What we want to talk about today to level set and really put some perspective on what the content is going to be. It is 5 o'clock. I want to be respectful of your time. The story with Windows 8 in terms of app compat does not require the insane technical contortions that most people's previous migration would have entailed. And as a result, I don't have a demo-heavy, super geeky, ultra nerdy, here's how shims work kind of talk. Instead, I want to talk about the process of how in the world can you take your existing legacy ways of handling changes in the OS and adopt them to how do you take Windows as a service, this thing that might update at any given time, and accommodate that while managing the risk to your organization. The insane technical contortions that you might require will be in the event that you're not currently using Internet Explorer 11 on whatever version of Windows you currently have. How many of you are not currently using IE 11 today? So I'm going to go with about half of you. So for those of you who want that technical background, we have a session on Thursday that talks about the in-depth details of managing and modernizing to get to IE 11. So I didn't do both of them in this session. I said this one's going to be about the process, and that one's going to be about the one area where there is a lot of technical heavy lifting. Now, I did a similar talk to this, kind of as an introduction to it, at a previous event. And at that event, I bid farewell to Windows XP. Which had its end of support take place on April 8th of 2014. At that event, I did take the opportunity to actually bring in a coffin for my box copy of Windows XP. But I thought, you know what, I don't really have to do that this time. And then I read the news, and it turns out that perhaps we still have some work to do on Windows XP, particularly if we live in England and like our government agencies. So there's still some part, right? So when we talk about that, we do talk a lot about understanding technical debt, understanding, how do we get into a better spot overall. And a lot of the motivation for that is that we truly have built something that's really stable. And I have said on a number of occasions that, with Windows, we've actually built one of the most stable platforms you can have for application investments. And by that I mean you could have taken an application built for Windows 3.1 and still be running it today. By which I mean, I've seen a lot of customers who have taken applications built for Windows 3.1 and still run them today. I love seeing compile dates in the 1980s, and that does occasionally happen. Right? But that's the reality, is short of the mainframe, right? And we do get compared to that sometimes, like, hey, you're not compatible. I've had this mainframe app running for 40 years. We don't quite get that far. But we do tend to do really well. And if you look at some of the platforms we've had, how many of you still run VB6 on something in your environment? My guess is that's probably most of you. In fact, statistically speaking, on average, about half of all enterprise software running today has at least some Visual Basic 6 in it. Visual Basic 6, as supported today, and we have not yet announced what's going to be happening for Windows 10, right? So the details will be updated. But even if it's just through Windows 8, we'll have outlived Buddy Holly. A very stable environment. But where we need to get to is to understand that this stability does not mean that we can't be agile. The old way of thinking about things had us saying, you know what, keep everything the same, and therefore nothing will ever break. Easiest way to think of it. Just don't ever change anything. That is particularly the case when you outsource. When we see people who outsource their IT, the outsourced IT vendor says, great, yes, you're happy to maintain this environment and make it cheaper to manage every single year. The only thing you have to do is never update anything. Otherwise, we'll have to charge you more for that. Right? And that is the pattern we hope to break, is one that says, you know what, you can be agile in a stable environment. And this takes a different approach than what we used to do. The legacy approach, and I pulled this verbiage directly from the AppCompat toolkit. That's Microsoft's tool. It should express our opinion. You go find it all, you analyze it all, you fix what's broken, and then you move. That's the process, right? And part of that, right, that whole collection thing, still to some extent surprises me. Because think about what that means. Collect. Figure out what I have. How do you not know what you have? What do you do when you hire someone new? How do you make sure they get the right stuff if you don't know what stuff they're supposed to have? That is a challenge to solve, and it helps us in a number of different ways. So when we think about how do we transform that, it's subtly different, but importantly different. We don't go and discover it and then forget and throw away that knowledge. And I have worked with customers that did discovery for their XP SP2 migration and their XP SP3 migration. They throw it away and they go rediscover everything. How do you manage that instead? Manage and understand what you have and understanding what you're providing, what is in essence an insurance policy for. You assess based upon risk, and you update based upon value. So let's talk through those points and how they apply. When you manage, right, the one thing we try to walk people through is it's not just the desktop. What's the number one blocker to Windows 8.1 deployments? Why don't people use it if they decide they actually like it, right? If they like the UI, right? And that's the same thing for Windows 10. If you want to go to Windows 10, why wouldn't you go? The reason why is typically not my desktop apps. It's typically my web applications. And that's the challenge. We need to understand what are the things that matter. And web applications are the hiding place of shadow IT, where people get stuff and they introduce them and they don't even tell you about it. And when we think about how do we manage that, we need to then concern ourselves with the fact that it is impossible for us to do anything meaningful with a full inventory. In fact, if we start taking a look at web applications, I'm going to use my favorite demo tool, the calculator, and start doing some of the math of what it would take to do a comprehensive inventory of everything that I possibly have. If we constrain the problem space to web and desktop apps alone, the average enterprise organization will have on the order of 500 million unique things, URLs, that they possibly go to. And the URL schema does not differentiate an app. You can't tell based on a URL which is an app or which is a shared page that might be a completely distinct app within a domain. There's no way to tell the difference without someone inspecting it. There's no heuristics that you can write. So 500 million things to go through. Let's go ahead and bring in someone to solve that. Let's say they're going to go ahead and spend 5 minutes each looking at those. And we're going to have to pay them, of course. So let's go ahead and we'll offshore to someone who'll do it to me for 25 bucks an hour. Nice and cheap, right? So it's going to be, about that much, right? But we've done it for 5 minutes, so we need to divide by 60 minutes an hour. So that's going to be our total cost. We're like, okay, no problem. We'll go through and do our rationalization for the low, low price of just over $1 billion. So first things first, if you have a budget of $1 billion to do rationalization, I would love to talk to you about that. I would happily sell you those services. But the reality is no one has the budget for doing that. So instead, we've got to get a whole lot smarter than just find it all and look at it all and start categorizing it. Now, the application taxonomy that I like to use is one that defines things as Is this a managed application, supported, unsupported, or banned? Now let's put some definitions into this. Managed means I'm going to make some level of commitment to have looked at it before I do any significant change in my environment. Supported means I'm not going to promise to look at it before I go. But if you have a problem and you call me, I'll answer the telephone and take a look at it for you. Unsupported means you're welcome to use it. If you got any problems, don't bother calling me because I'm not going to answer the phone. And banned means I'm going to actively try to stop you from using it. Because here's the thing. If you are making a commitment to make something a managed application, you're providing an insurance policy. And if you think about the insanity of what actually happens in most organizations today, here's the commitment that ends up being made. Someone goes out, gets an application, gets it installed on a machine, and they expect it to never break again between now and the end of time. Now, they didn't tell you about it. They never asked you to review it. They didn't make sure it complied to standards. They just got it installed, probably because 10 years ago everyone was a local admin. And boom, now you're on the hook to support it forever. Let's bring in an analogy for that. I'm going to go out and get a house. I'm not going to tell Allstate or Geico, whoever the insurance company is. I'm just going to go buy a house, and if it burns to the ground, I'm going to call them and demand they give me money for a new house. I haven't paid a premium. I didn't even tell them I had it, but I'm going to tell them they're on the hook. That's exactly where IT departments end up. You're on the hook for stuff that you never agreed to support. That's a little crazy. So how do we get out of this process of putting ourselves on the hook for everything? It starts with having a process for getting things to be managed in the first place. And within my managed apps, I also want to make sure that I'm investing appropriately. So I like to further add a taxonomy that says I'm going to categorize them by just how critical they are to my business. Is this of gold criticality, the single most important thing that I have? Is this, silver? Is it bronze? What is the actual degree of diligence that I want to apply to it? And this should affect how I behave. This isn't just a value judgment. For my gold applications, I may insist that I have full end-to-end regression. For my silver applications, I may just have someone come in and take a look at it. Some people will say, you need to show up in my labs if it's silver. For my bronze applications, I may just have a technical person poke at it for a bit, just to make sure. Just make sure I'm guarding it. And I want to behave differently depending on how much risk the transition entails. If I have a 25% failure rate, which incidentally is what we saw on average in the transition from IE6 to IE8, you test more stuff. If I have a 2 to 3% failure rate, which is what we see in 8 to 11, I test fewer things based upon the risk. And then I trust but verify. Right? And that's one of the things that I will say that Microsoft has struggled with to some extent is we kind of don't like to give you the numbers of what kind of failure rate should you expect. Because it's never fun to say, yeah, we might have broken a quarter of your stuff. Right? That's a conversation no one really likes to have. But it turns out that fixing that is kind of hard. Because you're going to figure this out. It's not like we can hide it from you forever. When you move, you're going to discover, when we said, oh, it's highly compatible. By the way, we said that for Windows Vista. My favorite line in the entire cookbook. It's highly compatible. But in the unlikely event that something breaks, 21%, then you have to go back and fix it. The challenge that comes in is that what we see from the earliest adopters is qualitatively different from people who are in the mainstream and people who are laggards. So if we were to go and be very aggressive in gathering the data from early adopters, what we would find is that that data would represent people who are not only very early adopters of Windows, but tended to be earlier adopters of everything else. That stay more up to date across the entire catalog, and therefore may not apply to you if you're the sort of organization that likes to wait to the end. So how do we gather that? So it's tough. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try to solve it. I'm just trying to give you some of the background behind how we make the decisions that we do. But in the end, it all comes about qualifying risk. Now, one of the things you're going to see coming out relatively shortly, it just got signed off on earlier this week, is a How Microsoft Does IT article that talks about the process we use to build things based on risk. And the approach that we use is one that I put as an analogy to the canary in a coal mine, which is we have applications grouped together by similarity. If one of them falls, then we test more in that group. If the canaries all stand up and they all just work, then we say we're done with that grouping. And that allows us to continue to measure our risk in real time and act on it. More risk, we test more apps. Less risk, we test fewer apps based upon what we see in our stuff, which might be different from industry averages. Now, the other big finding that we see as we go through and think about this risk and think about how do we make things better, that on average, we end up better off when we haven't gone through and put in really weird configurations. All right, so one of my favorite articles ever, and the author happens to be in the audience, is a article that's titled "Sticking with Well-Known and Proven Solutions." You can do a web search for it. It'll come up as hit number 1. My favorite article to bring around, because what we find is that you experience more risk if you go through and do things your own custom hyper way, right? And the article talks about, hey, if you get hit by a bus, you're probably going to go out of business. That kind of thing is a reality. So when we start thinking about organizing and understanding, getting some measure of brittleness, some measure of customization and hacks I have to do to keep this working to manage it down. As I manage and understand, I want to start looking at that and start changing my behavior so that I no longer have these incredible permutations. Now, I normally do a demo. I won't go through it again because it takes a little bit of time to run it. But I'll kind of describe what it is. I have a demo where I just go through and showcase, what, I could run it. I'm going to see where it is. But what we do is we talk about, just in the world of IE alone, how many different permutations are there of group policies? That's the word, IE configurations. Now, you, of course, can't see my screen just yet, so we'll go ahead and do that so we can see that to show off what happens here. So IE permutations, we'll let this scroll through. So in the world of IE, this on the screen is the actual number of different permutations of the IE group policies that you could potentially configure. And I have seen many customers go one by one through every single policy and go, I wonder what the best setting would be for this policy, which will land you in one of these configurations. Now, the rather unfortunate thing about the size of this number is that we don't have quite that many test cases when it comes to IE. In fact, here's the number of molecules in the observable universe for comparison. It fits on one screen. It is literally impossible for us to have any idea what happens if you put an arbitrary configuration in there. So from a management standpoint, to reduce your risk of having challenges ongoing, don't muck around with settings. If you want a higher security configuration, we provide that in a way that is known and proven and used at a lot of customers. The Security Compliance Manager will give you high security settings if that's what you need. Out of the box, you get a really good secure configuration as well. But in terms of simplifying management and accelerating your ability to keep up, sticking with the stuff you know is absolutely a winning strategy. So with this management approach, where I simplify my policies, I reduce my deviation from normal, I categorize and understand my applications, and I take a risk-driven approach, how do I go about and do assessments? right? And it's real simple. You just go find the app that scans it all, tells you exactly what's broken, and you go fix it, right? A silver bullet that everyone's perpetually looking for. Turns out we don't have one of those, and people keep looking for it, and they get very angry when they don't find it. And they keep hearing things that sound like silver bullets. And when it comes to that, what I really want to kind of do is go through some of the math of what it means, because it turns out that it's all based on probabilities. There's no way to say emphatically that something is definitively broken. So when we say, well, how good is it, right, the number that you get tossed out, if you even get a number, is typically the number that's aggregate for over the entire body of applications. To determine the predictive value for a single application, we need to use the Bayesian algorithm, which is shown here. I assume everyone's highly familiar with this Bayesian algorithm and the statistical approach. Yes? Oh, that is the quietest I've ever heard anyone be. But I'll go through and apply it. When we did the transition from Windows XP to Windows 8, which is when we got a lot of excitement about static analysis that can scan everything, we found that it started at somewhere on the order of 95% accuracy. And it dropped. It declined over time, and it finished somewhere around 85%. Why did it drop? Did suddenly they start writing bad code? No. It dropped because the more time passed, the more applications you were statistically likely to have updated. The more you updated, the more that were likely to work. The more that were likely to work, the harder it was to find the ones that didn't. Because it turns out to be harder to find a needle in a haystack than it is to find a needle in a needle stack. And that's the basis of the problem, is it just got harder. But when we look at this and say, all right, what's my predictive accuracy at the individual application level, it turns out to be 59%. Still pretty good. It's the best we had, to be honest. It was used an awful lot. It was a really good approach. But we start taking that approach and bringing it to other technologies, and we say, well, what about the transition from 7 to 8 or 7 to 10, where it's somewhere around 60% accuracy? We're still not bad, but the failure rate is sufficiently low that the predictive accuracy at the individual application level is about 12%, which means I'm wrong 88% of the time. Probably not what I'm expecting. Not so bad for budgeting. Terrible as my only strategy. Moving from I6 to I11, the big jump, predictive accuracy of 13%. 8 to 11 is even harder. Predictive accuracy of 2%. I'm wrong 98% of the time on average. That silver bullet didn't help me. And the challenge really comes down to, how is it that you define compatibility? There's no state of being compatible. The definition I use for compatible is, this is an application that has no bugs on the platform I want that stop me from getting my work done. And that last clause is really, really important because of this guy. Alan Turing proved mathematically in 1936 that it is impossible to find all bugs in an application. Mathematically impossible. It can't be done. So I only have the statistics. And the statistics bring me back to this point. Is it going to stop me from working? And the answer to that depends on how you work. And that's why user tests end up being the one surefire way to know what I'm doing. So I do my technical due diligence, but if I actually have to manage the risk of work stopping, I've got to try doing my work. The process comes before the tools. And all across the board, I want to make sure that I understand, what is the process that I'm enforcing, what is the tool providing, and what's the math behind it? What's the data? I'm not going to take it as a silver bullet, because the quests for silver bullet usually end up with people being sad. And it turns out I personally don't like to be sad. So when we look at the approaches that people use, they use tools in a sensible way. Doesn't mean they don't use them. It means they use them with a full, eyes wide open understanding of what they can do for them. We look at ways to get a lot of work done in bulk, the more industrialized approaches. How do I look at a lot of stuff, particularly my less important managed applications? How do I look at many of them? I look at crowdsourcing approaches. How can I get people to test and feedback data? It was one of the interesting approaches that we took in enterprise mode, and we'll talk about that in greater detail on Thursday, but it was a key component of the design. Let's help you find a way that you can report back how things went for you. That way we can put in really sensible gates. Once we've proven that we won't actually have a work stoppage problem, we can start deploying. And once we start deploying, if we make it easy for you to report issues, we can continue to feed back. Right? And this approach of the gradually expanding pilot, of getting things out there and gathering data, managing the heavy risk, and once the heavy risk has been covered, looking at the rest by putting it out there for people to use it. Right? Think about what you do at home. Right? So I'm not a heavy PC gamer. I'm a mild PC gamer. I like to do it for relaxation at times. And really, my criteria for my home PC to upgrade is, what game am I playing right now? Does it still work? If so, I'll upgrade. If not, I'll wait till I finish the game or the game becomes compatible. Now, of course, if you're me, you could also go in and try to fix it, which I'm prone to do, right? I remember back in the Windows XP days, that's what I did for Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed. If you go mucking around in the shim database, you'll find a shim in there, because what they happen to be doing in that application, for anyone who wants gory technical details, if you're getting, your eyes are starting to bleed from the lack of technology here, what they were doing to improve their performance is they were allocating memory until the memory allocation mechanism said no more for you. On the Windows 9X stack, that happened well before you ran out of memory. Windows NT has a very good memory manager, and it will continue giving you memory until it literally runs you out of memory, at which point performance is not better, it is actually significantly worse. So what shim did we create? We created something that would emulate early failure the way 9X used to fail, and that's what we applied to keep that game working. Most people aren't going to do that, right? But they'll go through and say, does my stuff work? And if so, once those things work, the rest I'll figure out as I go. And that can be a really effective strategy, but that ties in well with, well, do I have some mechanism for people to feed back to me when things aren't going as well as I would like? Because the challenge is we can't hope to know everything that's going on in the organization. That's not possible for us anymore. This is a diagram that comes from some research being done out of MIT by a man named Cesar Hidalgo that talks about the complexity of organizations and productivity as being directly correlated to the extent to which we're able to distribute work across different members of the society. And being a fairly reliable indicator of the economic success of that society. Think about it. How many of you can build your own computer? By which I mean you mine your own metal, then you smelt it, right? Then you hammer it into the chips, you print the boards, right? Not just I'm going to assemble something that someone else did, but everything start to finish. No one can. I can't think of a single person that knows how to do every single step on there. That measure of complexity adds value. But it does mean that you can no longer own everything. You don't know what all of these business applications do. You can't have a chance of going through and doing all of that testing. So you've got to lead. And that degree of leading means you've got to take a bunch of people that don't report to you, that don't care about you, that could probably care less about your upgrade project, and drive them through this process. How do you lead without authority? How do you make it simple? Right? So some of the strategies that we see being taken. My gold application, I need regression testing. They understand full well, if they own one of your most critical applications, that failure is not an option. So normally those are fairly straightforward. What about my silver applications? How do I make it easy for you to do some testing? What some folks will do is they'll say, I'm going to make you actually come physically in and do UAT in the room so I can make sure you did it as one part of the strategy. Whereas in the bronze applications, yep, I'm going to make it as easy as I can. You can test as much or as little as you want. I'm going to stand up some VDI servers, and you can connect up to it as long as you want, and I'll make it easy. In some situations, they'll even say, you know what? You'll do some testing. I'll send you one of the brand new laptops, the one that everyone else isn't going to get for another year. I'll give you one, and you can test on that. But it's going to come with the new OS on it. It's going to come with the new builds, the new Office, the new IE, the new Edge, the new what have you. Bribery is perfectly okay. But how do we motivate people, and how do we track? How do we keep our readiness awareness so we know exactly where we stand? And this all has to do with whether or not this stuff works. Here's the harder problem. What about my vendors? Will my vendors support it? How many vendors are supporting Windows 10 today? I'm going to go with none. Because we don't have a shipping version of Windows 10. How can you support something in beta where new builds are coming out all the time? I think we're going to have to figure that out. As an industry, we're going to have to figure that out. Because what if it changes? How do you provide support? Are you going to make people go fast track, slow track? And what if you have a mix and match? But that diversity of support is a challenge. It's a challenge I don't think we've solved yet. Right? So if you look at the one area where we're really working very, very hard, because that's the big compatibility challenge today, it's the fragmentation in IE. So for those of you who are unaware, which is hopefully nobody, effective in January of 2016, the only version of IE that will be supported on any Microsoft OS will be the most current version available on that OS. So if you're running Windows Vista, both of you, that means IE 9 is it. If you're running Windows 7, IE 11. If you're running Windows 8, I think you're out of luck because that one in 8 support ends. 8.1 is going to be IE 11. And really the big one that most of you will find is I'm on Windows 7, where I used to have a choice of 8, 9, 10, or 11. What we see statistically is it's about 70% on IE 11 worldwide. That's everybody, consumers, enterprises, all up. And of the remaining 30%, it's about 10% 9, 10% 8, 10% 10. And if we filter it based on just those that are domain joined, that data we know still excludes anyone who's doing WSUS. So the biggest customers aren't represented. But even just domain join alone, it's much more grim. We see IE8 at 50% or more. And this challenge, right, of, hey, it could be 8 or 9 or 10 or 11, that's not just a choice for the end customer. It's a choice for every single application vendor out there. And the problem that we saw was, well, there were some vendors who would say, I only support IE8. And some that said, oh, 8, 9's good too. Some that would say, you know what, N or N-1. That's sort of the de facto stance of most cloud services, right? So on Windows, that would be, IE, it would be 11 or 10. And that's it. The problem is I have never met a single customer who could say, if I chose this version of IE, then every single one of my vendors would support it. None of them did. And that left you with a terrible choice. Right? I thought the choice was fairly straightforward, right? So if I have the choice between, I can choose, let's say, even if it's just bifurcated, if I have 8 or 11. If I choose 8, I have some apps that aren't supported and probably don't work because they're probably HTML5. And I have some apps that are supported. Let's say I choose 11. I'll have some apps that aren't supported, but I can probably get to work because I've got document modes to help me. And some apps that are supported. Now, to me, the choice seems fairly simple. If I have a choice between I have everything working but some things unsupported versus I have some things unsupported and they don't work at all, I'd at least like to have them work, given the choice. But that also requires motion, forward motion, to get to not resolve that area. We are hopeful that by changing our support stance, vendor support will start to consolidate on the latest. We expect it'll take some time, and we're very realistic. I do not expect it to be perfect. I don't expect everyone to always keep their support statements up to date, particularly the versions that you have. Case in point, there is a vendor that will gladly tell you, we support only the latest version of our product. You should never run anything else. We will say it in bright red letters on our website. Running old versions is a terrible security idea. And of course, naturally, nobody requires you to run old versions of this. Nobody, no one, ever requires you to run old versions of Java, right? But did it get better when they changed their support stance instead of the historical stance of, yeah, pick whichever one you want. They're all good. It got better, and it didn't get perfect. Right? So it's hard. It's a difficult spot to be in, to be an ISV in the enterprise space. Right? But that's what we need to sort out, is you've got to figure out, well, you know, how do I balance support with compatibility and build up the right strategy and take the appropriate risks? Because in essence, what it means is, and this is what people don't get, if it breaks on the new platform, the only way they won't take my call is if it doesn't also break on the old one. So it's a subset of the total amount of problems I could potentially have. And that's the risk I'm actually taking. So once I get through this whole assessment and I understand that I'm able to do it in a more agile way, the next question becomes, well, how do I go about the process of updating, of modernizing? When I start thinking about the tangibles, right, one of my favorite business quotes is, you know, anyone who assigns 0 values to intangible benefits prefers being precisely wrong to being vaguely right. This is the conversation we have a lot. When you start talking about, you know, what could you do differently on a modern platform that you couldn't do on a green screen? All right, go buy some furniture. I don't know of very many furniture places that will actually not use a green screen to sell you their furniture. Any of the furniture I've bought in the past couple decades have all been on a green screen. Would there potentially be value of moving that forward? When you think about, if I'm going in and have a retail environment, would a touchscreen add value to that experience? Or do I want them on that keyboard still? Are there ways that I could create new experiences that help me generate employee satisfaction? It leads sort of vaguely to the bottom line. You know, and I'm starting to see some people embrace that. You know, one of my favorite stories, until it turns bad, is from a customer who said, you know what? We want people to think of us as being technologically advanced. So therefore, the strategy we have is when you join our company, you will be assigned a brand new, shiny, sexy, beautiful MacBook Air. And you come in like, oh, I'm going to work for the kind of company that gives me a MacBook Air. Now, of course, none of their apps were written for Mac OS, so it did run Windows. And of course, none of their Windows apps were known to work on modern versions of Windows, so it ran Windows XP, and there's really no reason to go through and, you know, improve the startup script. So you had these beautiful MacBook Airs that you would open up and hit the start button, and about 5 minutes later, your startup scripts would be finished, and you would actually have booted all the way into Windows XP. Kind of an incomplete experience. But the notion of doing that, right, the concept, I think, was great. I can provide something that makes you think of it. And I've seen the opposite as well. One of my favorite quotes ever from a customer who was in the process of retiring finally their XP. They made it over the line about 9 months after end of support. The conversation we had was, I had one of our college hires came in and sent a note right up the chain that said, listen, if you are going to compel me to use a version of Windows that was released when I was in elementary school, you're going to have to provide me with some training because I don't remember how to use it anymore. So getting to modern has a lot of values in addition to the direct values we can do. But what about technical debt? How many people didn't make a compromise along the way to getting to their current platform? A setting they had to click on or off. A real big one, UAC. How many folks have UAC turned off today? Yeah. And you're running as admin also? That's technical debt. For those who didn't turn off UAC, how many of you enlisted third-party software that would automatically elevate your applications to run as admin? Right? Think about what this means. Now, so shortcuts are fine, right? It's arguably better to get most of the way there than to not make any forward motion at all. But if you think about what this means, right, let's make the case for UAC. With UAC turned off and people running as admin, everything I run runs as admin. And when I think about the security ramifications of that, it makes it trivially easy to gain compromise of the box and trivially easy to start doing things that would allow me to do lateral traversal and to do escalation upwards to get things of higher privilege, particularly if I don't have the discipline to make sure that I'm guarding against credential theft. Right? So it's a dangerous place to be from a security perspective. And from an experience perspective, when we look at where we went in Windows 8, where we're going in Windows 10 with universal apps, or Windows apps, or believe me, I do not know why marketing renames these things every 6 months. Whatever they're called today, right? What used to be immersive and what now is windowed and blah, blah, blah. But the new app model in Windows actually gives you a lot of great functionality and has a hard dependency on UAC and its features. Turn off UAC, you can't use them. We'll talk about that in my session tomorrow. We go into the details of what is the security model around applications. That's one you should look at turning back on just in order to get to a modern computing platform. But what about those auto-elevation things? By auto-elevate, some people say, oh, that's better, right? Because I'm only giving admin rights to particular pieces of software. The only problem that I have with that is that you're only giving, let's think about this, you're only giving admin rights to your oldest and worst software. That's what we're doing. Yeah, no problem, right? The only place I'm doing it, right, is on this thing written in 1994. Why would that be a problem? We're really good at security back then. That's the kind of thing to think about. Oh, when you phrase it that way, maybe that's not where I think there's low risk. In fact, maybe that's where most of the risk lies in the first place. As we get better and better at protecting the actual meat-based user, people go after applications. And if you're auto-elevating those applications, then you're really not that much better off from a security perspective. Problem number one. The second problem that so often comes up is those rules, typically the customers that I've spoken to who went this path, went there because they wanted to hit the easy button. They wanted to be able to say, I've done this, but they didn't have the time or the resources or the knowledge or the skills to do it the way that they ideally would have liked to, so they took a shortcut. But if they take too many shortcuts, those rules can be pretty difficult to unwind because you can say anything in this directory, auto-elevate this. Anything with this name, auto-elevate. Everything in this publisher, auto-elevate. And you end up having a rule set that's read linearly that's difficult for humans to grok because it gets fairly sophisticated, and unwinding it becomes a problem. Right? And I have a few customers who are trying to do this today. They're saying, you know what, we need to have nothing running as admin in our highest risk environments. Right? When we start talking about retail environments or financial services, it's like this device has access to what we define as one of our highest value assets, or HVAs. So I don't want anything adding risk there, which means I have to unwind this. So how do I make sure this won't get auto-elevated, that this won't add risk to the equation? And figuring that out is tough in order to understand what I even need to go and fix. Technical debt. When I look at, the shims I've put on, or in the world of IE, session sharing is another real common one. Right? And those who've had this, it's an interesting phenomenon. Those who have the issue know it well, and those who don't. A difference in the architecture of Internet Explorer 8 was that, in fact, here, we'll do a demo. We've been looking at slides too long. By the way, the rest of my sessions are 100% demos. This is the only slideware session that I've got. So in case you are not a fan of slides, but let's look at the process model. We'll get sysinternals Process Explorer that will allow me to see that I've got a parent Internet Explorer with a couple of child processes. And we look in the process model and sort of think through the ramifications of that. Internet Explorer now has a frame process that has the back button, the forward button, the address bar, and then tab processes. That's what renders the web page. Frame process is 64-bit. The tab processes are always 32-bit. I mean, blah, blah, you can get all kinds of details here. The important thing is different processes. You make a new tab, you get a new process, potentially, but it will also share them sometimes because managing an individual process takes resources. So we want to strike a balance. The more processes we have, if one crashes, it takes down fewer stuff. That was the problem with IE7. You had something that crashes, it brought the whole thing down and you lost all your work. So if we have unique processes for everything, if you bring one down, then you only lose that one tab. Except if you have unique processes for everything, a lot of people will open up a lot of tabs, right? Statistically, most people open up fewer than 5, but if you open up more than 5, you often end up opening just a ton. Like there's a lot of people whose mental flow around IE is just open a tab for everything I want to read before the end of the day and leave it there. And even those who will say, and I want to close it and have you automatically reopen to what I didn't finish reading yesterday until I close it. The IE open tabs become my memory mechanism. Right? And so it's an interesting bit of data that we've got to sort of pry those two things apart. Now, when we think about what the implications are, IE used to have its cookies stored in the process. New process of IE, new bag of cookies for non-persistent session cookies. And then when we did this rejiggering of the model, now you're potentially shared or not shared based on chance alone. I start opening some new tabs, I might get a new process. Or I might share it so I don't have this huge resource burden. And it's not deterministic. So two tabs might be in the same process, or they might be in different processes, and I don't know which. So rather than having it be arbitrary, do I share or do I not share, we said, you know what? Every child of this parent process will share, period. Problem solved. Now there's no more arbitrariness, right? Because there's very few things in this world that are worse than something appearing arbitrary to someone who's trying to figure out why something doesn't work. So we said, great, this parent process is it. You can make a new one by going File, New Session, and it will File, New Session, and that will create, if I go back into Process Explorer, a new parent session with new child sessions. You see how that works. That's a new parent and new children there, and they'll all share cookies as well. Well, here's the problem that happened from a technical debt perspective. There are plenty of applications in the world that will store in a non-persistent cookie some kind of login unique information. And it used to be you could fire up a new tab and log in as a different account. Think about webmail. If I would go to Outlook.com and open up a new tab, you'd be in the same account. You can't be in two different. You wouldn't log in again. You would share it because they are using non-persistent session cookies to manage that. And in organizations, a lot of businesses would do this in their applications. They would bake it in. They'd go into multiple accounts for reasons I don't know, right? But that's a design issue. Or different customers, right? So I may have one tab open, I'm looking at one customer. And another tab open, I'm looking at another customer. If I enter information, right, let's say it's a bank transaction. I'm working on customer 1, and I put their information in my session cookie. Then I go over to customer 2, I'm sharing a session. So I say, oh, go to a different customer, and now I switch over to customer 2, and I put in their information. I then flip back to customer 1 and say transfer money. My cookie still has customer 2 information in it, and suddenly I just gave that guy a bunch of money. Completely by accident. So what did people do? Did they fix the apps? Or did they turn off tabs? Did they disable all the tab process growth? And they do a whole bunch of unique configurations sort of counter to the whole thing. And it turns out a lot of them would do that. And they took on that technical debt. They said, you know what, I'm going to postpone that, and I'm going to deal with it later. And that later, we're still kind of waiting to have happen. All right, so it starts with identifying it. What is the technical debt that I took, and when do I choose to repay it? And the other trend, right, go and figure out the things that I want to get in the next round. The other thing to take a look at is, where is my stuff brittle? This is something I don't see tracked a whole lot. But you can probably name a few that are on your own personal hit list if you've seen a migration or two. That application that breaks every time you change everything. You could simply accept it must be everything that's causing it to break, or you could say, you know what, maybe it's not the everything else in the world. Maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with the design of that application, that it's just not terribly resilient. And I should do something to try and make it more resilient to change, rather than saying I need to eliminate change from the environment. Because one thing we're seeing is change is not only coming as fast as ever, it's accelerating. So how do I address that? As I start thinking about, addressing all my legacy and my history, right, and my plans, I really do want to understand, where are these problems coming from, and what are the other ramifications? And the other ramifications, one of the ones that I've been having a ton of conversations on lately has been around security. If you have access to news, you may have noticed that there have been a few struggles with security this year in a few organizations that are sort of getting people's attention. Right? When I think about brittleness, what are the platforms and the legacy platforms that are causing me challenges? For example, remember how we mentioned the subtle challenge that folks have been having around application hard dependencies on legacy versions of Java? Well, here's the threat landscape. Going from 2006 to 2013, what was the source of most vulnerabilities that exploit kits were targeting? Right? Used to be 40% Windows. So you're like, all right, service Windows. This is, by the way, from a data standpoint, I see a couple cameras coming out, so I'll think it. This all comes from the Microsoft, MSR, the Microsoft Security Intelligence Report, SIR. Yes, I'm totally screwing that up. The Security Intelligence Report, pulled directly from there. I try to update them periodically because it actually gives you, this is what the real world looks like. And if I look here, I'm like, all right, so in the past I'd look at, how do I secure Windows? How do I do that? In 2013, I'd be like, oh, the exploit kits are actively targeting Java. Why are they targeting Java? Because the bad guys have figured out that people aren't keeping their Javas up to date. They're easy pickings, and so they go after the easy pickings. They are like all other developers, and I say that as a developer. We're lazy. If something's easy, we'll do that one. Another view, right? This is the exploit kit related malware detections. This is where we actually found malware. Not just what the kits are producing, but are able to produce, but where they're actually successful. So someone's already had malware put on there. Here's how they got there. The blue is Java. That's brittleness. I've got technical debt, I've got brittleness, and I really want to keep it up to date, and I can bring in some data to support that concept. The other brittleness, right, and this is sort of stepping back from the security area, but a personal pet peeve, and it continues to be the #1 challenge we have. Please, 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 that's 3 pleases, do not check for version numbers in your code. You will get it wrong. And I've seen it get it wrong in spectacularly fascinating ways. My personal favorite, right, and I'll pick on ourselves, right, because we do stuff wrong. At Microsoft, we fill out our expense reports using a tool called MS Expense. And MS Expense, when we did the transition to Internet Explorer 10, we found a little bit of code that was checking the version of Internet Explorer by looking at the string in the user agent string, looking for MSIE, that string token, and grabbing the next character after that and converting it to a number. And in IE10, the next character was a 1, followed by a 0. But it wasn't grabbing the 0, it was grabbing the 1. It's a string conversion. And it thought you were coming in using Internet Explorer 1 and helpfully suggested in one of the most hilarious possible ways that you kindly upgrade to Internet Explorer 3. Telling you how old our expense reporting system might have been. Now, we recently upgraded it after what apparently was about 15 years of use. Again, right, I am very mindful. The average age of an enterprise application, 12 years. So we're mindful of that. We just want to find the brittleness. Version numbers are hard. Now, I'm going to go back into the IE part just because IE is such a critical part of the whole Windows 10 strategy, right? If the version number part, in fact, let's finish this up. I don't know if you know this or not, but we started this in Windows 8.1. Windows 8.1, if you ask Windows what version it was, by default, it lies to you. It'll say, hello, I'm Windows 8. We did that because historically we would always tell you the truth by default, and then we'd lie by exception. You would apply what we call an apt-compat shim, and you would pretend to be a different version of Windows. Super easy to apply. Anyone can do it. Aaron Margosas can do it. But you'd have to go and actively do something. So starting in Windows 8.1, we lie by default. What version of Windows are you? 8.0. And things would keep running. And we carried that on. In Windows 10, we actually lie in even more spots. What version of Windows are you? I'm 8.0 still. Until such time as you put in an application manifest, which is a little bit of XML in the file, that will say, I know all about you, Windows 10, and you can go ahead and tell me the truth. If I put in an 8.1 manifest, it'll tell you it's 8.1. If I put in a Windows 10 manifest, it'll tell you it's Windows 10. If you tell it you know about the platform, it'll start telling you the truth. All right, it's kind of like that game you played in college. So what's your name? Well, what do you want it to be? Kind of how it works. What does that mean? If I'm on Windows 7 and I have a version check that says, oh, if it's not 7, then don't work, I may have to manually apply a shim to pretend to be Windows 7. If I'm on Windows 8, it's going to carry on saying it's Windows 8, eliminating that big, hairy, nasty, gnarly problem that we always had to fight with historically, and just carry on working. So customers who are coming from Windows 7 ought to be familiar with the version lie shims, because you might have to enlist those to pretend to be Windows 7. It's the one major difference. Overall, the statistics are overwhelming. Most stuff really, truly does just kind of work, right? But if you're checking for the version, you might have to do something extra if you're coming from 7 that you wouldn't have to do if you're on 8. That's why the best plan is, if you're going through and testing and introducing it, you should know if it works on 8 today, ideally. Be testing it on Windows 10. But take that understanding and incorporating it into what you do. But that's the one major delta. In the world of IE, and we'll go into all kinds of details on this tomorrow, but I want to talk a little bit about the strategy, and I'm going to bring in a couple of diagrams that I actually brought forth to the team that inform the development of what we're doing, right? So this is actually directly from some of the original product specifications. This is what we noticed in terms of the actual cost of migration. We kind of simplified it a little bit here, but the top bar in purple versus the bottom bar in blue, we said, the cost of going from 6 to 8 was pretty high. 8, 9, what is it? 6 to 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 10, 9, 7. Yeah, 7, 8, 9, 10, yeah. So 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 to 11. Most people skipped over some, so you start getting additive bars. But here's the general idea. The cost of remediation going to 7, that's the purple bar. How much does it cost me to fix it? I had to write code to do it, typically, if something was broken. And that cost went down dramatically. Going to IE8, if I came from 7, it was easy because I had compat view. And compat view meant I had to write very little code. It was very cheap to remediate. And those compatibility modes kept getting better and better and higher fidelity moving forwards. So great news, right? Less cost to remediate. Bottom bar is how much does it cost me to test it? And what we found is that most people tested them all exactly the same, spent the same amount of time. So we've got to incorporate both costs. How do we make it faster and easier to test, as well as faster and easier to fix, right? And that's the strategy we had when we started talking about, enterprise mode is we need to think about what we can do to help with the testing, short-term and long-term. The other bit of information is that, that we brought into our overall designs was that there really are a couple of different ways that people think about upgrades. The top bar, the green one, is, the progressively moving forward. This is what cloud services want. I want to always run on the latest. I want to take every upgrade you can, because the way I differentiate myself from my competitors is by adding new features. So I want you to be faster. I want you to do more, so I can build in more features faster than the other guy does to make a more compelling web-based solution. So keep me always up to date, which is very different from a large body of enterprise applications where they're trying to deliberately be left alone for a while. The punctuated equilibrium in the yellow line in the middle. I'd like to stick it in my data center and leave it there for a few years, and then come back and upgrade it and leave it there for a few years, so I'm not constantly managing it because I don't have time to do that. The red bar at the bottom is the one that most people would, if they were to tell the truth, that's what they kind of want. I'd like to deploy the solution and leave it there literally forever and never have to change it again between now and the end of time. We don't yet have a solution for that, right? But this kind of thinking is what goes into like this punctuated equilibrium thought, fast track and slow track. That's what we're trying to snap to, is something that allows you to benefit from innovation, but it also allows you to have this punctuated equilibrium. All part of our strategy, and then the final bit around upgrading is process of an upgrade, process of a deployment and migration. I'm going to follow the treasure map. I'm going to get to where I want it to go, where X marks the spot. Once I get there, I would be smart if I were to dig for the treasure. If I get to Internet Explorer 11 and don't create any HTML5 applications that create a new experience, all I've done is take on all the cost of getting there, and I've not gotten any benefit yet. If I go to Windows 10 and I don't write any universal apps, all I've done is take on all the cost of getting there and not gotten the benefit yet. So the plan should include digging for the treasure. And a large part that's because of the shift that we've seen in where innovation lives. In the past, if you could just keep up to date with the platform, you got tons of really great features. Think about it. This is back when Windows would say, hey, Windows now has a TCP/IP stack. And if you can get to the current version of Windows, you get that for free. So by design, you try to keep things small and lithe and agile. But then we had sort of the great decade of the 2000s where the platform really wasn't changing that much. The innovation all came in the application, and the response to that typically was, I'm going to make these large application behemoths, these giant ivory towers, built upon this massive foundation that can't be moved at all. And innovation is suddenly coming in the platform again, where now you can all of a sudden do things in HTML that we only dreamed about, that we had to get Flash to do before. We had to get Silverlight to do before. Now we can just do it straight out, pure HTML, nothing but markup. Now I can build touch-based sensitivity without having to know anything about multiple fingers and so forth. The platform just provides that for me. All right, it gives me a better experience. It's faster. I start to remove cooperation dependencies. I no longer have to have the Flash guys agree with the IE guys, agree with the Adobe, everyone else. I can create new experiences, and I end up with something that's easier to maintain. Let's go into the IE world in HTML. Even if you don't build with new HTML constructs like Canvas, you can benefit from HTML5. This is one of my favorite little things to do. This is just a raw, nothing but hello world page in HTML4. Now let's go through and convert this to HTML5. So first things first, that doc type, that's not adding any value. Let's just say it's HTML. Right? That's shorter. The next HTML declaration, good Lord, I'll just say it's in English. Okay? Great. What's next? Let's go ahead and address that meta tag. That's pretty long. We'll just say meta car set. All right, and that style sheet, that's kind of long. Let's just do it that way. And suddenly we end up here. So we've gone from here to here. A whole lot shorter. And when you start thinking about the value that that can generate, we've gone from 412 to 188 characters. Naturally, my computer went to sleep. Let's bring back our calculator, my favorite demo tool. So 412 minus 188. So I've saved 224 characters just in skeleton HTML that adds no value to my application. Now, how many users do you have in your organization? Let's say you've got maybe 30,000. You're big. And how many web pages do you think they go to on an average day, each person? 7. That might be a little low. Let's say it's 1,000. Plus 7. Right, so that's how many bytes I would save in 1,000 pages. And 1,000 pages is arguably a pretty conservative number. 1,000 HTML documents, I save this many bytes of data, this many megabytes, this many gigabytes of data every day. 6 gigabytes a day of data I'm not pushing across my network, adding no value. Now I can go talk to the guy paying the bandwidth bill. Hey, I'd like to finance a little project to do some HTML5 upgrades, and I can save you 6 gigabytes a day on my 1,007 pages the average person goes to. A boring business justification, but a real one. Right? And this is what we've got to get better at, is defining that ROI. Right? How do we convince someone that it's worth going through this change? And there really is a story, even if it's a boring one. And some of the boring ones really win the project over. I had a customer who was justifying their transition off of XP, and they said, you know, we're going to go off of XP, and they were going to Windows 7. This is before Windows 8 existed, but here's what they did to justify it. They measured at the plug how much electricity was going through to the device on Windows XP. They upgraded the same device to Windows 7 and measured at the same plug how much electricity was going through on average. And they said, great, we saved this much electricity multiplied by this number of devices. Our power bill is going to go down by this much. That pays for our project. Sold. On power consumption. Bandwidth consumption. I mean, think of all these stupid, silly, boring things that actually represent value. And those are the conversations we need to shift to have, right? How do we manage it smart? How do we provide the right insurance policies? How do we drive value? Now, Microsoft, we're really trying hard to listen. The things that we've been doing, Enterprise Mode IE, which by all indications is the most unmitigated success story I've ever seen in the history of AppCompat. And I've been doing it since 2006. It works incredibly well. If you're not familiar, come find out about it. I'm giving a talk on Thursday. The Site Discovery Toolkit, which allows us to find the sites that you have and what modes they're working in so you can start with data to drive your modernization efforts. We looked at building applications. It used to be that we really designed them for third parties and cloud applications, and we focused on doing loopbacks and leveraging more existing code and doing it that way. We are trying to really understand what are the pain points from getting to the most current platforms we have and begin to address them in very robust ways. And I'll sum it up by saying, today we can be modern and we can be durable. And I'll say this, we got a lot more we can do, and we're just getting started, and we can't wait to join you on the next part of the journey. So with that, thank you very much for coming out, and we look forward to seeing you maybe at some other sessions. Have a great evening.